First, let me say that I think the opposition to the war in Iraq was many-fold. There were those in the military and all the services who objected to it for the same reason Secretary Powell did to the President of the United States. And that was not because they didn't think Saddam Hussein was a dictator who needed to be gotten rid of. It was because the timing was extremely bad. We had not finished Afghanistan by any stretch of the imagination. That's why we're still there today and why essentially we're losing. And it was not with the amount of international support that we felt was necessary and could be built up if you kept working the United Nations, kept working the inspectors, and indeed did finally find some WMD. And you got to a situation where that WMD could only be dealt with through military force, much the way we did in the first Iraq War. So there was a great body of military people who said, we understand how bad Saddam Hussein is. We understand that Norm Schwarzkopf signed a ceasefire in the desert, not an end of war agreement. We understand we still own the top 1/3 and bottom 1/3 of Iraq, we and the French and the English. The French dropped out, we and the English in 2003. We understand that he's violated 17 UN Security Council resolutions. So we're not necessarily against taking him out, but we're against doing it without Afghanistan being finished, and we're against doing it without international support. And El Salvador, I'm sorry, does not constitute international support. And then there were people who were just against it because they knew, like Zinni, who had studied the area, knew the area well. General Zinni was more of a diplomat in the Middle East than anybody from the State Department. General Zinni knew that we weren't going to be met with flowers and roses and candy. And he knew the administration was not looking at it except through that lens. And so it was going to be a catastrophe, and indeed it did turn out to be a catastrophe. But your more important question, I think, is the second part, which is, could it happen again, and what would the Pentagon do? What would the military do? That is a huge question for you as citizens of this republic to contemplate. Right now, there is a move similar to the move with Iraq in, say, 97, 98, but today with regard to Iran. And it is made even more poisonous and dangerous by the fact that it's attached to an issue that we simply cannot deal with rationally in Washington, Israel. We can't. I was recently at a conference in Liechtenstein where an EU representative kept going on and on about how he couldn't understand how Washington could be so irrational when it came to Israel. And of all people, instead of the Israeli ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Israel jumping up, he was there, Carl Eikenberry jumping up, then going to Afghanistan to be our ambassador there, or any of the other U.S. people were there. An Austrian jumped up. And he said, I will say an Austrian who had been in the United States for about 18 years at Princeton, and he said, you simply don't understand. The United States is irrational when it comes to Israel, and it will be irrational for as far as I can see into the future. So this situation is complicated by that irrationality and the passion that goes along with it. We're marching towards, with the Neocons and others who are advocating it, another war with Iran. And the military wants out of that. There are some in the military who will go right along with it, of course, but the basic leadership of all the services and the Joint Chiefs of Staff kept George Bush and Dick Cheney from going to war with Iran by their reluctance to go along and their constant drumbeat of you can't mean it, Mr. President. Another theater in Western Asia? We can't even handle the 2 theaters we've got. And you want another theater? You've hired enough private contractors to equate to another Army and another Navy and another Marine Corps just to do Iraq and Afghanistan. How many contractors are you going to hire to do Iran? We're talking about 71 million people who are much more fused than Iraq was. You're talking about a 5-year ground combat campaign to conquer a nation that is not going to give up until you've killed at least half of that population. So watch carefully as we move through the next few years and these people try to build a drumbeat for war with Iran as an inevitability. Israel, inevitability, got to. Or watch and see if Israel starts it and we have to come pick up the pieces, and then see what your Pentagon does. This is a recipe for a huge constitutional crisis.